Hello, and thank you for joining us on The Brink. I'm Andrew Fox.
And I'm Jake Wallace-Simons. This is a bonus episode featuring our joint appearance on Iran International, the London-based anti-regime television station.
In our conversation with Iranian presenter Negar Mojtahedi, who herself is on the regime death list, we covered a range of topics, including the truth behind the clampdown, what Trump is really thinking, what military action would look like, and the prospects of a free Iran.
If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it, and leave a comment, as we do love to know what you think. And if you're listening on audio, give the podcast 5 stars. And if you're still hitting that blasted paywall, now would be a great time to subscribe at thebrinkpodcast.substack.com.
Now, without further ado, we present The Brink on Iran International.
Major Andrew Fox, conflict researcher and senior associate fellow at the Henry Jackson Society, and Jake Wallace-Simons, foreign correspondent, columnist, and author of Never Again, How the West Betrayed the Jews and Itself. You're both co-hosting the podcast The Brink together. Thank you so much for both being here.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having us.
So we've got U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, and even Iran's top security official Ali Larijani, who are expected to hold talks this Friday. I just wanted to start with your reaction, given the moment we're in after tens of thousands of people have been massacred. Andrew, why don't we start with you?
Well, there's a number of possible things this could be. It could be a genuine attempt by the Trump administration to find some kind of pathway to essentially get what they want from Iran without having to go to war. It could be a delaying tactic by maybe both sides, as the Americans get their plans in order for any potential military attack, and the Iranians try and avoid that. So there's a number of possibilities it could be. But the bottom line is it's taking a lot of time. It's taking a lot of effort and energy, and the Iranian people continue to suffer whilst all of this diplomatic maneuvering goes on.
Jake, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think from the Iranian regime's point of view, it's business as usual. We know how they behave when they're under pressure. What they try to do is engage in talks, string the talks out for as long as they possibly can, while secretly advancing their own agenda as much as they can. A lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of sort of smiling faces and nods and smiles, and in the meantime, just trying to advance their own position and shore that up. So that's what they're trying to do. What Trump is trying to do, I think, is much more complicated. My feeling is that the way to read Donald Trump at the moment is that is in the sweep of American history, in that we had the disastrous intervention of the Vietnam War. Then we had George H.W. Bush with a successful intervention in Kuwait. Then we had the disastrous regime change attempts by George W. Bush in Iraq, and particularly in Afghanistan, which Andrew knows so well, sadly. And now we've got a new era where Trump, he's not an isolationist. So much is clear from his interventions that he's done so far, not least in Venezuela, but also in Iran. But he's also not pro-regime change. He's learned that lesson loud and clear from Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think that what he's trying to do is almost regime taming. And his agenda is not so much wanting to bring democracy around the world. He doesn't see things as, he's not like a human rights guy. He's a foreign policy guy in terms of hard-nosed realpolitik. He wants American interests to be satisfied. And I think that he sees in Venezuela, now it's less aligned with China, Iran, Russia, more aligned with the US, but still a suffering country. That's not his concern. I think with Iran, he's seeking to advance a similar agenda. What he sees in it for him is, it's interesting that his response to the protest was more, let's see if we can do a deal on the nuclear threat. Let's see if we can do a deal for the region in terms of neutering the Iran threat externally, and less, let's see if we can help the protesters. So I think that's how he's seeing things really right now.
Wow. So do you think if the Iranians, being in the weak position that they're in, would hand over some uranium or agree to some sort of deal to go to zero enrichment, do you think he'll take it and that will be the end of it?
I think that it's difficult to imagine Donald Trump backing away from military action completely. I think that the precedent that would set would be potentially a replay of Obama's famous red line in Syria that he failed to implement, and then that led to, perhaps Putin's invasion of Ukraine, of Crimea, the emboldenment of America's enemies. So it's difficult to imagine that Trump does nothing, but I think it's easy to imagine that Trump takes some kind of action which satisfies that threat, but also it doesn't qualify for regime change, allowing him to tame the regime, get some concessions, perhaps if they're desperate enough, on nuclear weapons, perhaps on ballistic missiles and so on, and then back off full action to support the Iranian protesters. I don't think that's really what Trump wants to do. Now, I do feel, however, that the regime is too fanatical to give up its nuclear ambitions. It really, its whole reason for existence is this millenarian, apocalyptic 313 fighters kind of Mahdi theology. So I don't think it will meet Trump at that position. So I think we will be looking at military action in the end, but I don't think it will be full regime change from an American point of view.
And Andrew, speaking of that, taming the regime, as Jake said, what about something that would lead to a regime collapse, not necessarily regime change, and then the people can take it over from there?
Well, look, there are three levers to pull when it comes to this kind of statecraft. There's the economic lever, the diplomatic lever that we're seeing at the moment, and then there's the military lever as well. And it's about how you apply those three in coordination with each other. So we've seen the pressure that sanctions have placed on the regime in Tehran. That's the economic lever, and that can go on indefinitely. Where we are with diplomacy, I think, it's very much a replay in many ways of what happened before the 12-Day War, where Trump will fully run out of time and patience and then will order the military option. And what the military option looks like is what's going to decide whether I think the regime stays in place or not for now. We know how disparate, how dispersed the IRGC is, how the Basij run the country on street corners. It's very difficult to target all of those. If you want to hit them all, it's going to be multi-days, multi-waves, airstrike after airstrike after airstrike, with probably a significant amount of civilian, what we would call collateral deaths. That's not, I don't think, an option that Mr. Trump is keen on. I don't think it's off the table, but I think it would be very much the last resort. And so what we're looking at is a combination of that economic, diplomatic, and military to create a situation whereby the people in Iran will be able to take over in due course.
I wanted to ask, what would the military option look like at this point? And would it have any impact then on collapsing the regime, on making change? Because, we have to keep in mind, Trump did make that promise of, we're locked and loaded. If you shoot, we'll shoot back. Help is on the way. Keep going.
Look, I think that's a different phase of this. That part is over. Trump has already let down the protesters that he encouraged, that he promised to support, and who he told was, to keep going. That's done. That promise is broken. It didn't happen. Now we're into a different stage where we see if there is any help for Iran more generally, but those tens of thousands of protesters are dead now because Trump didn't come in time. So I think we'll have to look at this in two phases. For a military option going forward, it's very difficult to collapse a regime from the air and then see what happens afterwards. And we learned that lesson in Libya. And they're not the same. There are always differences. But the bottom line, if you take out a regime by airstrikes and you don't send ground forces in to stabilize afterwards, you lose a huge degree of control over what comes next. And of course, we know there's as many as 1 million people under arms in Iran who support the regime still. The kind of revolutionary protest side are minimally armed. And so what happens when the regime falls is very, very complicated and could go a number of different ways. So it's a very, very complex thing to try and do if you don't commit your ground forces. And we're not, I don't think, seeing any signs of the Americans being willing to do that, whatever happens. So Mr. Trump has created a situation where he has to do something, and he probably will. But in some ways, he's very much backed into a corner, and he has let down the protesters, whatever happens.
And so, Jake, what do you think is that something that Andrew's talking about?
I think Andrew speaks a lot of sense. If you look throughout history, revolutions themselves don't often end in stable liberal democracies. They more often lead to more authoritarianism, and counter-revolutions, which is basically what this would be. It's a revolution to undo the revolution of 79, have even less track record of success. So history doesn't paint a very positive picture. There's various competing objectives here, I think. From the Israeli point of view, certainly the ballistic missiles would be a priority to get rid of those. It operated for those 12 days in a target-rich environment, didn't get to the end of the list by the time Trump closed the window. The nuclear program as well needs to be fully destroyed if it's not to be rebuilt. We saw satellite images showing some possible attempts for the Iranians at salvaging some material. There were some roofs that went up over some of the nuclear plants, suggesting that some activity was going on there just in the past few days. From the protesters' point of view, I suppose they would want those 11 IRGC headquarters throughout the 31 provinces of Iran taken out, hit, so to give them a bit of breathing space to throw the enemy into disarray. We had on the brink Kazra Arabi, the well-known Iran analyst, who very vividly mapped out that as a priority for the protesters. Certainly the Ayatollah and his office is a target for Trump, though. I think that it's difficult to imagine any scenario involving military action in which the Ayatollah survives. I think what's quite likely from Trump's point of view, in terms of the agenda that he would like, is a regime that is still unpleasant, hasn't collapsed completely, throwing the country and the region into disarray, but under new leadership that's been tamed by the Americans and that's more compliant and is less of a risk to the Israelis, to American interests and to the region, without a nuclear program, with reduced or eliminated ballistic missile stockpile, and with a more compliant regime. I think that probably is an agenda that Mr. Trump would like to see realized. Does that equate to a free Iran? Does that equate to help for the protesters and a democracy and Reza Pahlavi coming back on a cloud of glory? Probably not. It's not good news for Iran as a whole, but it might neuter the threat, which I think is the wider threat, regional threat, which I think looks like what Mr. Trump's agenda is more likely to be at this point.
So more of a Maduro style, as
Indeed.
they did in Venezuela. But if they put somebody from within the regime, can that individual be trusted? I mean, the Iranians have shown time and time and again that they will lie.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I don't know what Andrew thinks. I mean, my feeling is that one feature of the Western countries is that we continually underestimate the fanaticism of the Iranian regime. Yes, the regime has people who are in there for the grift. Yes, there are racketeering. Yes, there's gangsterism. Not everybody is an ideologue fanatic, but enough of them are. I mean, as Kazra mentioned on the brink recently, the IRGC are clerics in uniform. They are much more fanatical than any opposition that the West has faced in a very long time. Now, Trump has been more hard-nosed with regard to the regime. He hasn't been fooled in this and strung along as the Biden administration was. But even he could be persuaded to be convinced that actually there are some less fanatical elements of the regime that might take over, be more pragmatic. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that the fanatics are in the driving seat and will remain so even if the Ayatollah is gone. I don't know what Andrew thinks. But it could be that Trump is fooled by pragmatic words from hidden fanatics in the same way as Biden was on a much grander scale during his time in office.
So what do you think, Andrew, especially that you know about the policy in Islam of Taqiyya where you can lie to achieve your goals, and the fact that the IRGC have their fingerprints on pretty much everything in Iran. And even with these talks happening this Friday, I mean, Ali Larijani is going to be there. He's connected to the IRGC. He's one of the masterminds behind the massacre, in fact.
Yeah, and that's why this is so difficult. It's why there is no obvious, easy, quick solution that presents us when we look at the military side of things. And you know, just as Hamas in Gaza have managed to engineer their survival so far, they know that there is a ticking clock with Donald Trump, and it's a 3-year ticking clock. Like, he won't be in the White House forever. So all they have to do is play nice whilst Mr. Trump is still around, and then reassess the political terrain once the next presidential election has a result, and we know who the next president is, because certainly a Democrat president is likely to be played in the same way that Biden was, in the same way that Obama was. And the Republican replacements are certainly looking even more isolationist than Trump, especially if it's J.D. Vance. So everything changes in 3 years' time anyway, and these regimes, these organizations have the advantage that they don't think in electoral cycles when it comes to their own plans. All they have to do is think in generations. They can have long-term plans, and they can have a hudna for as long as they want to rebuild their strength. Hudna being the Islamic term for a sort of ceasefire where you regather your strength. They can do that for as long as they need, and they can still keep their religious goal in 10, 20, 30 years' time. And we really have to understand that psychology when we're dealing with these people. They're not like the Venezuelan crime cartel, who will happily do a one-place change. They'll get rid of the person in charge, replace them with the number two, and the number two will play nice because they don't want the same thing to happen to them. It's not the same as Venezuela. And my concern is that Mr. Trump, thinking of everything as a transaction, hasn't quite appreciated that nuance, because we're seeing Qatar, Turkey, Hamas playing him for a fool in Gaza. I suspect the Iranian regime will try and do the same.
I mean, I would only just add to that Trump's campaign website is selling Trump 2028 rewrite the rules merch, and by the rules it means the US Constitution. So it looks like there are some signals that we might be looking at another Trump term despite the Constitution, whatever the Iranians are hoping for.
Oh, that's a very significant point, definitely. And, does this risk normalizing the Islamic Republic to a certain extent? I mean, I know that the Americans have met with, whatever, the USSR and China when they've committed severe human rights abuses, but I think we've moved beyond that. I mean, I spoke to Dr. Payam Akhavan, who's a former UN prosecutor. He is an expert in genocide, and he calls this an extermination. Something that we've never seen in the scale of Iran's modern history, from modern history in general. So when you see an extermination, as he's labeled it, does this not risk normalizing that kind of behavior? I think we've moved beyond severe human rights abuses here.
Yeah, the massacres, the scale of the massacres we've seen in Iran in recent weeks really have recalled the 20th century, I think. It's recalled Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. That's the scale of the slaughter and butchery that has been carried out on the streets of Iran, in just the same way as the Soviet Union has used, for example, and the other dictatorships I've mentioned. There is a danger that the regime could be normalized if Trump's transactional attitude, as Andrew describes it, leads to a deal, the art of the deal, that leaves them much more neutered with respect to the region and the Americans, but still in control of the protesters and still with the ability to gun them down if they are to seek to advance their own freedom as they deserve. That is a really real risk, I think. I mean, either way, I think in the longer run, maybe in the medium term, in the next few weeks, couple of months, the Iranian regime is going to emerge broken. But will it be intact or not? I think it's likely, unfortunately, that it will still be intact.
And a question for you both. I mean, with the 12-day war, at the time, we didn't see protests. But I do feel in many ways what we saw in January was a result of what Israel and the United States did in Iran, because it really did weaken the regime. And when Israel was able to take over Iran's airspace, a lot of Iranians who were out protesting said, that they felt the regime wasn't as strong as they thought it was. And it gave them the courage to go out in the street. So if we do see more military strikes, like you mentioned, Kasra Arabi from United Against Nuclear Iran, pointing out the different IRGC centers, etc., or even taking out someone like Khamenei, couldn't that then lead to some sort of revolutionary change? Are the elements not in place there right now? Andrew, I'll start with you, and then Jake.
That's the ideal outcome, quite frankly, is that there's enough military action from the Americans that it creates the opportunity for internal regime change. That's the dream outcome in many ways, because it kind of answers a lot of those questions that I flagged up earlier about who runs the place once the regime is gone. So that would be ideal. That it's difficult because, as I said, there are so many security personnel that are attached to the regime, and they will retain a degree of mass to be able to put down protests. So that's the first hurdle to jump over. I think what that looks like is making sure that arms get into the country for the protesters, if we're really going down that route. Then we have to consider, where the regime sits once the bombs have stopped falling. Is there somebody that can kind of seize the reins? Is there somebody that can give the protesters enough that they feel that their challenges have been answered. Because, yes, the 12-day war was one of the catalysts for this. The other was a lack of water. The other was huge inflation. There's a kind of perfect storm of factors that have gone into this. And if there's somebody who steps over and takes over from Khamenei, who can reassure people that actually this is going to be okay going forward, then that might be a slightly different dynamic. So, yeah, as I said earlier, there's just a number of different factors that play into this that make it incredibly hard to predict what's going to happen next.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that when it comes to the possible success of the protest, we need to recognize that what we're talking about is military force, not in terms of, external military force we've talked about, but internal military force used against unarmed protesters. That's the obstacle that the protesters have got. Yes, they are fragmented, haven't had a single coherent whole and a leader to rally behind. Recently, it seems like Reza Pahlavi is emerging more and more as this unifying figure that the protest movement has lacked traditionally in recent years. But still, you've got people who are not armed. Not only they're not armed, but they're not trained to use arms. If you were to ship in a whole load of AK-47s and hand them out to the 17-year-olds on the street, they would probably shoot each other because they don't know how to use those arms. So what we're really looking for, the deciding factor would need to be in terms of the hard power. You've got a regime that isn't going to, see protesters threading roses into its gun barrels and put them down and join the protesters. But what we could see is some kind of defections. That's the only thing that's going to change the balance of power on the streets of Iran. If there were some elements of the army, for example, I know Reza Pahlavi has tried to appeal to the army to defect, the less fanatical elements, the less sort of brainwashed parts of the IRGC who were able to take the side of the protesters and turn arms against the regime, then you'd be looking at something more akin to a civil war. But it's notable that there has not been any sign of that so far. And without that, you're going to see brave protesters taking to the streets, young people being mown down and butchered. I saw a video of a school teacher weeping in his classroom because his entire class had been massacred on the streets. That's what we're going to see. The regime will not stop. It needs to be forced to stop. But how's that going to happen? That's a really big question.
And speaking of that, does the responsibility to protect kick in here?
Well, I think RTP has potentially had its day. I think there's been a number of instances around the world where that could have been used in the past 10 years and wasn't. I think Libya was the last one. I think Libya was the nail in the RTP coffin, quite frankly. And look, for that, you would need a UN Security Council resolution. I don't see Russia or China letting that pass the UN Security Council, which really leaves us back at square one. So, RTP had its heyday in the 90s, a brief flash in the early zeros, and I think that's now probably consigned to the dustbin of history.
Yeah, I agree. What we've been talking about is Trump's world now. The international rules-based order, if you believed in it, has definitely gone now. We're living in a much more, to use Andrew's word, transactional age. President Trump is a president who is able to flex and use American power in a way that Joe Biden just didn't. Trump has shown a power of deterrence when he wants to use it, perhaps not against Vladimir Putin, but against some other bad actors around the world. But the equation of foreign policy now is much more transactional. It's much more about the self-interest of the country. It's not so much about trying to protect human rights and protect those brave protesters who are giving their lives on the streets of Iran.
Well, then why do you suppose he put out those messages?
Do you know what? I think it's social media presidency again. I think he saw something on the TV, jumped on Truth Social, blasted out a message without thinking it through. And yet again, I think he just governs in the moment. It's not planning, it's not thought through. And I think his military will have gone to him and gone, hey, okay, but it's going to take a few weeks because we don't have an aircraft carrier because you moved it because you wanted to do the Venezuela operation. Generally, I think that's what it is. He's shot from the hip and it's backfired.
I'm not sure I agree with that. You could be right. I think that he saw or sensed an opportunity there. He knows that Iran is part of the axis of authoritarianism that he's been trying to dismantle with Venezuela and so on. He knows that there's unfinished business in Iran with regard to the ballistic missiles, the nuclear missiles, and so on. He sees the regime weakened by those protests, and he sees those protesters as potentially another element of leverage for him to advance his own agenda. He didn't, I mean, as Andrew correctly points out, he didn't probably have a laid out strategy, an idea in mind how he would get to his goal, but his animal instincts were raised, I think, and he saw that there's something I can work with here. There's some leverage here. There's opportunity for America to advance our own needs and agenda and wishes here. And I think that's probably what led to that weird, declaration of intent without a thought through strategy yet. But we're seeing that unfold. And I think that he's going to want to secure some of his own objectives, really, above all in this opportunity.
You said two very crucial things here. Number one, leverage of the protesters. Does that mean that he used the protesters for his own means? And what are the opportunities here for the U.S.?
Yes, I think you could say it that way. I mean, certainly it was astonishing how Trump had the audacity to encourage tens of thousands of protesters to continue taking to the streets in the hope of American intervention, perhaps knowing or not feeling obliged to bring that intervention quickly. I mean, to say there's blood on his hands, I mean, you could make an argument for that, for sure. And if I was an Iranian father who had lost my teenage son to the regime's bullets, who'd gone out there encouraged by President Trump's promise of quick action, I would feel pretty bitter right now, to say the least. But to say he's using them, I think that he definitely is a president who supports the ideal of freedom. But as Andrew says, there's also the competing agenda of transactionalism, of how to advance the agenda of the free world through a combination of military force and leverage. His main concern isn't with the lives of the protesters, I think. It's with having an Iran that is more easy to deal with in terms of America's foreign policy agendas.
What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I think I agree. I think he has firmly let down that first tranche, and really, I think the way history will judge this is what happens next. And I think this is now in the wind. If he comes away with a deal that he can trumpet, that looks like the Greenland deal, the non-deal that he came away from Davos with, but he can put it on social media that he's resolved the problem and isn't he great, and his followers will go with it, then I think that's an option he might take. I certainly think if that doesn't come off, I think there will be military action of some kind. But again, it'll need to be something that he can present as a win in this transaction. It needs to be seen that Donald Trump came out on top. Venezuela is the perfect operation for him. In, out, quick, done. Thank you very much. Look how great my country has done. Thank you. The last thing I think he will want to do is that long, protracted campaign. But he might be forced to it. If it shows that the mullahs are absolutely unwilling to bend, that might well be, that regime change from the sky 4 to 5 days going forward. So all of these things are on the table. We've seen a degree of betrayal already, but where we go next, it could go from very, very soft to very, very hard power, and everything in between.
So what is a win then? I mean, if the Americans say zero enrichment, as you said, the Iranians would most likely say no to that. That's both their red lines. That's going to lead to conflict. What would a win be here then?
Well, I mean, from the American point of view, it's going to be, those demands that Trump has made are demands that the Ayatollah is never going to agree to. I mean, he would be deposed by his own fanatics if he were to sign up to those. And yet that's what the Americans are demanding. And they would be willing to take military action in order to get a more pliant leader who would be able to sign up to those things. That's what the Americans want. But I think that the important thing to remember from Trump's point of view, he's not thinking in terms of the individual protesters, in terms of the tens of thousands of protesters. He's not even really thinking about Iran. He's thinking about the bigger picture, I think, which is that you've got China as the center of gravity of the main opposing pole to American power. You've got Russia as the junior partner in that. Then you've got Iran. Then you've got Venezuela. And he's always trying to maneuver a way to fragment that alliance and advance the American agenda, with the caveat that he's pretty pro-Putin. I mean, that's the part that isn't quite aligned with that. But either way, he's always disrupting, he's deterring, he's ducking and diving and weaving. What he says is often a sort of almost like a disinformation campaign. I mean, did he really intend to take Greenland, or was he saying that just to make the Europeans talk about that and take their eyes off what he was doing with Iran or with Putin? Everything that he puts out on Truth Social, a lot of the time, is what Steve Bannon calls flooding the zone. You know, it's distraction. It's taking people's eyes off what he's really trying to do. None of this really is very reassuring for the Iranian protesters and the Iranian people. That's the great tragedy of this. We're not seeing a kind of moral foreign policy in the way that the Iranian protesters and activists would like to see. What we are seeing is a power play of a bigger picture, and Iran fits Trump's overall game of chess, I think, global chess, in that way.
And things could change quite easily if Iran were to do a preemptive strike on Israel. Do you think that that's potentially in the cards, or are they so weak right now that they don't have the capabilities?
I don't think that's that stupid. I think is probably where we're going with this. They know that Israel is probably going to stay out of this. If it goes ahead, it's probably going to be American-led and American only. The US Navy does not need assistance from the Israelis. You know, Israel have a very capable air force, but it's a very, very long way to fly to Iran when you've got an aircraft carrier right on the doorstep. So at the moment, the Israelis aren't getting involved. The second Iran opens fire first on Tel Aviv, all bets are off at that point. And then we are looking at that multi-day, multi-wave, guaranteed removal of everything to do with the Iranian regime's infrastructure. So it would be a particularly foolish thing to do.
They're fanatical. Do you see that?
Only if it's a Parthian shot, I think. Sorry, Jake, mate. Well,
I was about to say the same thing as you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so it's only in the case that the regime is about to fall, and so what they do is fire everything as a Parthian shot to try and take down as much of the Gulf and as much of Israel as they can with them. That's the only real situation I can envisage this one occurring.
Yeah, I mean, let's not forget that the ideology of the Iranian regime, the Mahdiism, is apocalyptic. What they want, what they believe will happen, is an apocalyptic war triggered by the destruction of the Jews and a war with Israel that will then draw the whole world into it. Then the Mahdi will return, and he'll have his 313 generals and so on and so forth. And so you can imagine that if they see that the writing's on the wall for them, they could think, right, now's the moment of the apocalypse. Let's fire everything off at everybody, and come on, Mahdi, come and save us. You can imagine. I mean, I'm laughing, but it's not funny. But you can imagine that actually that's what guides their foreign policy. They're not normal. They're not normal authoritarians. They're not normal dictators. They are religious fanatics. That's their primary characteristic.
So I just wanted to end things off with this information war that I've been seeing online, where a lot of people within the Iranian regime kind of influence network are painting this as, any kind of foreign intervention is bad. And, the Iranians are stuck in the middle between their own repressive government and potentially foreign intervention. And that a lot of what we're seeing is A, by rioters, and B, again, foreign intervention. Most likely they're referring to the Mossad and CIA. What do you guys make of that?
Look, we're already seeing the early stages of this information warfare playing out over our phones as we speak. We know Iran has a very sophisticated and very well-resourced international influence arm, and they will absolutely be trying to take pages out of the playbook that we've seen for the last 2.5 years by painting themselves as innocent victims of international aggression from the West, and of course, by implication, from Israel as well. So that is the paradigm that they will be trying to push. And actually, in many ways, the delay that we've seen from protests to now to military action has actually helped them with that slightly. Because if it happened during the protests, that's much, much harder to spin. Now there's been a bit of a pause. They can say, hey, look, we tried to negotiate, but the Americans wouldn't have it. So that's the direction they're going. It'll be combined with threats. And actually, the corollary to the information stuff is my concern about the response on Western streets and what they have the ability to generate in London, in Paris, in Brussels, in Washington. Whether they can not only generate protests, as we saw in London last Saturday, we saw regime flags being waved in the streets of London. But also, is there any violence and any kind of terrorist related activity they can generate here to kind of have a degree of retribution or control over the situation? So the information and the subversive are very closely connected. And we're going to have to be good, because look, information campaigns are irrelevant if you don't have some sort of output from them. Like if you just say a bunch of bad things about your opponent, you've achieved nothing. If you say bad things and you can generate action from that, that's what you're looking for in an information campaign. So it's that bit that we really have to watch out for and counteract.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. The thing that the Iranians understand is that there's a lot of people in the West who only see the world through the prism of how it reflects their own ideology, their own actually anti-Western liberal ideology. So when they look at Iran, what they see is an enemy of Israel, and that's a good thing. Because Israel is a representative of Western capitalism, Western colonialism, I suppose they would put it, Western white supremacy, Western racism. And so they wish to, they instinctively support the Iranian regime because it opposes in their narcissistic worldview, opposes all the things that they think are wrong with their own society, that they're trying to campaign against. That's how they see these things, the whole world. And so these people are exploited by actual signed up jihadis or Iranian Shia fanatics. And we saw that, as Andrew said, on the streets of London, where we had Hezbollah knickknacks being sold by the side of the road. We had jihadis. We had jihadis openly performing the Nazi salute, the Sieg Heil, which of course is adopted by Hezbollah. We had Iranians flying the regime flag, mustering outside the Ayatollah's London office, marching with the Iranian flag, regime flag, alongside the Palestinian flag, and praising the Ayatollah, even holding placard with a picture of the Ayatollah with the slogan, "The right side of history." And it's the Western idiots who think that all of this stuff is anti-racist that swell the numbers of these hardcore jihadis and terrorists, and act as the numerous sort of foot soldiers who hold the battering ram of jihad and thrust it into the gates of Western civilization. That's what we're facing. And the Iranians know that. They know how stupid the Western left is. And they know exactly how to exploit them simply by allying their own murderous fanatical regime with the cause of Palestine. That's what they're trying to do. That's what we have to contend with in the West as well as the Iranians. And that's why it's so important that decent Western people who haven't had their head turned by this propaganda, the few of us that remain, need to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Iranian people. Excuse me. Sorry, I just came to a crescendo and let myself down. Need to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Iranian people in standing against this information warfare, because it's going to bring us all down together.
Yeah, and to that point, on the day of the uprisings on January 8th, the entire day, Iranian state TV was playing Tucker Carlson. I mean,
Right.
what does that tell you, right? And I think that the uprising itself is spinning the Western liberal world upside down, because everything that's part of this uprising goes against what they think we are and how they see us, and they put us in this anti-imperialist box, right? Pro-American. A lot of them like Trump. A lot of them like Netanyahu. A lot of them are very pro-Israel inside Iran. I'm not talking about just the diaspora, inside Iran itself. And this is confusing a lot of Westerners. And I think maybe that's why I haven't seen a lot of Western people, hashtag save Iran or free Iran. I don't see any of that coming from them.
Yeah, they're just confused. They're like, could it be that we were wrong from the beginning? Oh, no. It's got to be that the world's wrong.
Exactly.
Cognitive distance is a really powerful thing. And also, I think it's difficult to underestimate how ignorant most people are about the Middle East. They really, a lot of people really only got interested in it on 7th of October. And they got interested on the Palestinian side, not the side of Israel, who'd been on the wrong end of a massacre. And they're learning as they go, bless their hearts. So as they suddenly reach the conclusion that perhaps the regime in Iran isn't very nice, even though they oppose Israel, as Jake said, it becomes incredibly difficult to hold those two conflicting ideas in your head at the same time. And so the easy thing to do is to dismiss the new idea, which is the one that the protesters in Iran are actually worth supporting.
And a lot of protesters in Iran are desperate, are begging for some form of foreign intervention here because they need help. So what would you say to those people who come up online and say, oh, well, any form of foreign intervention is bad?
Well, I mean, they're just as repulsive as the people who support Hamas with a nudge and a wink. You know, the River to the Sea people, the globalized, the Intifada people, even the Free Palestine people, when you dig down and ask them for their views on Hamas, they're not that bothered. They hate themselves much more than they hate Hamas. That's what it boils down to. They hate their own countries, the West, their own, the democratic values that gave them the freedom that they're enjoying to criticize it. That's what they really hate. Their minds have been twisted by generations of propaganda from the Cold War onwards, from race propaganda, anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. They're being manipulated by very well-funded, often state-sponsored disinformation campaigns that have been going on for decades and have monopolized the UN, monopolized the mainstream media, monopolized the NGO complex, and so on and so forth. So they really are victims of the West eating itself, and Iran is getting chewed up in the process. So what I would say to them is I'm not even sure I have words. I mean, these are the people who are the useful idiots who are bringing about or seeking to bring about the destruction of everything that is freedom-loving in the world, both in Iran and in the West. And they need to be educated and certainly silenced when they try to play with the big boys.
Well, thank you so much, you both, for your time. And I really enjoyed our conversation today.